Yippee-yi-yi, yippee-yi-oh.
Hello, my fellow readers. My name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky. I'm here with a weekly roundup, which I think is really 2 weeks worth of roundup, and that's okay. Here's what I've read. Let's start with what I finished over this last period. I started with Helen McInnes, her book Agent in Place, part of this huge 3-volume, 3-novel set that I got from a used bookstore for $2. I loved it. I have a review and I'll put a link down in the description. Next thing I read was a part of a large group read. It was Ivanhoe by Walter Scott. What a fantastic book. Read this as a group read, and we did a live discussion just a few days ago. Again, I'll put a link in the description to that live discussion. I thought that went really well. We loved the book. We all loved it, and I think we had a really interesting conversation. I hope you're able to watch that. Then I read, the other thing I finished was a short story. This is out of a volume of Willa Cather's short stories and early novels. It's part of the Library of America series. And I just read the first short story. This collection has the collection of short stories in it called The Troll Garden. I read the first one called Flavia and Her Artists. I think Willa Cather, when she writes about artists, it works really well. And this is a book with a theme that you see in some other similar stories from Willa Cather, where there's a patron of the arts who invites a bunch of artists, and that means painters and writers and musicians and lots of them out to her estate, and they talk amongst themselves and things happen. And it's not a huge dramatic plot, but it is really fascinating how things are turning over. And it's told by a friend of Flavia's who is not an artist, who is meeting all of these other people who are artists. So she's looking in from the outside. Really good story. I think I don't think I've ever read a Willa Cather short story, and I've read quite a few that I didn't like. So I'm going to keep reading those, and it's a nice little break from, especially after you read a long book like Ivanhoe. And as you're going to, as I'm doing, the book I'm currently reading, Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. So this is part of the Dickens at Christmas event that Alan from Alan's Reads and Julie from A Bookish Travel put together. We're doing a group read of the Pickwick Papers. It was the first novel that Charles Dickens wrote. It was, as many of his works, it was serialized. It is a picaresque novel, and it is really funny. It reminds me a lot of Tobias Smollett and The Expedition of Humphrey Clinker. And I wondered if I was just making that connection in an imaginary way, but I went and looked. I asked the internet, I did some Googling, and Smollett was definitely a favorite of Dickens, and he did read a lot of Tobias Smollett, and he did borrow from his style. He was influenced by Smollett, so that connection is definitely there. I'm just not too far into it. Where's the bookmark? Right there. So you can see I've only read this much. But we're reading that through December. In fact, the event goes all the way to 12th night, so there's plenty of time to get this read. I've put up 3 poetry readings recently. 2 cowboy poems, both of them about Thanksgiving. One is just called A Cowboy's Thanksgiving, and it was published in the El Paso Herald but the writer is unattributed. We're not sure who wrote it, but it's really a sweet poem. And then a more humorous poem is called Cowboy's Thanks. The first one, the unattributed one, has an A in it, A Cowboy's Thanksgiving. And this one by Frank L. Jones is called Cowboy's Thanksgiving. It's a lot more humorous, a lot more fun, but both of them just being thankful for what you have, what you've experienced, and having some regret about things that you don't have anymore, but you've still got the memories. You still have the things that are most important. Again, one serious, one humorous, but two great poems. And I read a poem from Jean Blewett called St. Andrew's Day, a Toast. It's written by a woman who was born in Canada to Scottish immigrants. And she's writing about looking back at Scotland, feeling like that's her home, and yet she's in Canada. And even though she's in she lives in Northern Ontario, and it sounds like in a Gaelic-speaking community, or at least a Scots-speaking community. I'm not quite sure from reading what little biographical information I found, but certainly was around other Scots immigrants. And this poem's about looking back at Scotland on St. Andrew's Day and using that as an excuse to remember home. And I did some musings about what it means to have ancestors who come from a place, especially we Americans who have, those of us who are not indigenous, we have such a relatively short time that we've been here. My earliest ancestors came to America in the 17th century, which is a long time ago for American political history, but certainly not that long in the larger sphere, not as long as the indigenous people have been here, not as long as the peoples of Europe and Africa and Asia. So it makes for an interesting, it brings out some interesting thoughts. And I did some musing and I thought I came up with some interesting points, but you can check as well. Again, I'll link to all of those poems in the description below. And what's coming up next, I'm not exactly sure. I may just fill out the rest of December with some short stories. I've got quite a few short stories sitting around here from Willa Cather and Jack London and Robert Louis Stevenson and Shirley Jackson and others. And I may just do some, when I finish the Pickwick Papers, may work a little bit on short stories. January starts a whole bunch of events, and I'll do a video soon about all of the events and group reads and buddy reads that I'm looking toward doing in 2026. That'll be coming soon. And something there is going to get started at some time, somehow. And I got to get through the Pickwick Papers first, and then we'll figure out where do we go from here. And there it is, my weekly roundup. Thanks so much for joining me today. And until next time, my fellow readers, my name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky.
Yippee-yi-oh.